Welcome to the webinar. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes. We do always like to know where our people are attending from. So if you wouldn't mind, in the chat box, type in where you're from. That might give Chuck, who's our presenter today on WildSpotter, some insights into what he might talk about. Throughout the presentations coming up, you are welcome to put questions into the Q&A box. We'll answer them all at the end. We always do pause for question and answer and give people time to type things in, but sometimes it takes a little while to get the question fully typed in there. Got someone from Colorado. I do like Colorado. Be out there quite a bit this fall for the American Phytopath meeting and a bunch of other things. A whole bunch of Colorado people, apparently. Okay, it is 11 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and get started. Our topic today is WildSpotter, and Chuck is presenting. So take it away, Chuck.
Thanks, and thanks y'all for joining us. Get this going. So I'm going to give an overview of WildSpotter and kind of where we're at with the WildSpotter program right now. So this is, if you were on the EDDMapS Summit, this is going to be very familiar to you, but we hit y'all with a lot of information during the EDDMapS Summit. And so we wanted to use this opportunity for this office hours to really explain WildSpotter, because I still think that there is some confusion of how it relates to EDDMapS and you know, thinking that it's a separate system, and it's not. And so that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, answer any questions that anybody has, and talk about some of the opportunities related to WildSpotter that are going to be coming up in the next year. So WildSpotter is a program that started about 5 years ago, and you know, as got everything ready to do a big launch, and then COVID hit, and it kind of made us change paths a little bit on how we were looking at this. But this was a project of us at the University of Georgia, the U.S. Forest Service, and Wildlife Forever. And it was all about trying to really look at the concept of getting volunteers involved, how we can get volunteers interested, how we can expand and use the public that are visiting our public lands to help us better monitor for invasive species. And so let's create something that is focused on that audience, that is focused on the audience that is interested in outdoor recreation, that is interested in getting into the areas that our agency contacts and our folks on the ground with the federal and state agencies don't always get to. And so that's kind of where this started out, with the initial focus on the national forest. And so, you know, the goal of WildSpotter is to, you know, survey as much land as possible and find, you know, new infestations of species or new species infestations, either way you want to look at it, throughout the public lands. And we're doing this in a couple of different ways. The first thing is, you know, you got to have a website to go along with the program. And if you visit the WildSpotter website, you'll notice that it's different from the EDDMapS website. And it's different because we wanted the experience there to be very focused on on the user and the problem, and not about downloading data, not about looking at data, not about, compiling a report that you can use for modeling, not having those tools that fit more in the professional realm that we're doing with the EDDMapS website, but showing pictures of people in the woods, in our public lands doing activities, and getting them to understand what the pathways are for invasive species, where they should be looking, and what they should look for. And again, the mapping part of this is all built on the EDDMapS platform. And so when a report comes in and it is reported through the WildSpotter app or through the WildSpotter website, then it goes through the verification process just like a record that comes from the EDDMapS website or from one of the EDDMapS apps. And so the verification system's the same, the review system's the same. We're just going in and adding other verifiers to help if they're the land manager for the particular public land. And so, let's say we're talking about the greater Yellowstone region, where you've got national parks, you've got national forests, you've got some Fish and Wildlife Service land, and they may not always know what boundary they're in, and that doesn't matter either. It's when you open the app, if you pull, if you're in the Yellowstone region, let's say, and you choose the Bridger-Teton National Forest, but when you actually take the point, it's located in Yellowstone National Park. Well, that doesn't matter, because the system is pulling in the species list for the national forest, but it doesn't matter where you are, because it will still allow you to take that data and that data go into EDDMapS. So just wanted to spell it out again. WildSpotter is another interface for EDDMapS. It's not a new database. It's just focusing on the users, focusing on the audience, and making sure that they have the tools that are best for them. When we were getting started with this, we did some print promotion. We've recently done working with backcountry hunters and anglers to target their membership better through social media. And we're starting to see the results of that with new interest and new downloads to the app. And then as we're been thinking about this from the beginning, it's making sure that we have the tools for the users on the ground to use. And so that's what we've done. We've put together a lot of educational materials. We've got some giveaway materials that we'll share with partners that are interested. And at the beginning, we had somebody that was working directly with those units, and that position has been empty for a little bit because we wanted to kind of shift our focus on this. And so we're going to be hiring somebody new to kind of fill that role and be that first point of contact with the wild places, whether they're national forest or other wild places, and just help them coordinate. And I'm going to build into these concepts of helping build that capacity at the local level, especially when we get to the end of the presentation. So when we started this, we started with a handful of pilot national forests. And the question we got asked the most was, how can I get my forest added? What about this? Or we got it from users. So there's no pilot forest near us. And so it was like, okay, so when COVID hit and we were slowing down the rollout because of staff not being at all the visitor centers and those kind of areas, then we said, okay, let's take this time, let's build out WildSpotter for all of the national forests, create the offline maps for all the national forests. I'll talk about that in a second, and get all of them included. And so we've recently done the same thing with the BLM lands. We've pulled in there at least information. We don't have all the offline maps and everything for them yet, but we were able to add a lot of the BLM lands just to add more options of areas. And we're going to continue to do that. We've also said, if you're a state agency and you can provide us with a spreadsheet of your state parks or state forests that you want to get added, that we will get those uploaded as well. And we've got a process to do that. So please reach out if that's something you're interested in, and we can kind of streamline getting your materials in as quick as possible. I mentioned the offline maps. A lot of what we tried to do with WildSpotter is make sure that we add other reasons for users to download this app. And so being able to pull up and see where trails are, where roads are, where campsites are, even when you don't have cellular capability, we thought that was a really important feature. And so we've added that for all the national forest, and then hopefully over time we'll be able to add it for more areas. And then the goal was for the app to be very easy to use, very user-centric, very simple, and just able for data to go in with very little effort. We've included a user guide right there off the home screen, and with the question mark, you can always pull that up. It's just a PDF user guide that's right 18 pages long, that's right there on your phone, so you can learn more about how the app works. And then, okay, how much is an acre? Can you visualize an acre? Well, this audience can't. And so we decided, instead of going with, an exact how many square feet of a population is, or how many acres, or how many, smaller quarter acres the infestation is, we said, okay, we just need to know if it's a plant, and thinking about it from that standpoint, from a plant standpoint, was it a couple of plants? Was the infestation the size of a basketball? Or was it about car sized? Or was it school bus size? And once it says school bus size or bigger, okay, well, you're talking about a fairly large infestation either way. And so, especially if it's an ED or R species, that's something somebody's going to jump on and go check on quicker. So we added this just to make it easier. The data will still be there. The verifier, if they actually go out and look at it, will be able to go in and update the record to provide more information on exactly how large the infestation was. But it's just trying to make that piece simple. We also added a way where users can create their own wild places. So you open the app for the first time, it doesn't have your favorite local park. You want to add that favorite local park and start collecting data on it immediately. And so now you can do that within the app, and they're like your My Wild Places, because they're not publicly available to everybody at that point. They're just for you, and you can start collecting data. And then ultimately you can always reach out to us and say, hey, I want to make this wild place public for everybody. I'm doing this project, and we can work with you to make sure that happens and is easy to do. We're going to add a request button down the road where you can make that request through the app or through the website. But it was just a way, so if there's not a national forest or not BLM land nearby, a way you can quickly get started using the app. We've added a few other features. We want it so you can collect data when you're offline, when you don't have cellular coverage, but then it's always hard to remember to do the upload out of your queue. So we've added in where, auto upload is turned on. And so once you have cellular coverage, the phone will try to upload and submit your records, or next time you open the app, it will try to submit your records. You also sometimes want your pictures saved that you're taking along these reports. So now we have an option where you can save those reports to your photo library. So when you take an infestation picture, you can take that picture, but then also have that picture saved on your phone as well. We created badges that are included in the app as well. These, are really focused on what taxa you reported. And so it's just a way to kind of get people, encourage people to report more than one taxa, and encourage people to, continue engaging with the app. We've also added wild places checklist, at least initially for the national forest and grasslands, where we realized there was not an app out there that we could find where you could check off what national forest you had been to. And so people love that kind of stuff. And so we've created this checklist. It syncs with the website. You can go on the website and update it as well. But just having that another feature in the app to give the user another reason to download it. And so as we continue to add public lands, we'll continue to add those checklists. And then building the leaderboards on the website where you can go on and see what users, see what species, see what forest or other properties have the most reports and where the most activity is. And then we created an awful lot of videos. And so we wanted short YouTube videos to kind of help you. What do you need to do before you go out and visit the wild place? How are reports validated? How do you quantify an infestation? How do you report an unknown or unlisted species? And so we wanted to incorporate those on the website, as well as just how to sign up to be a part of this. And so all of those are available on the WildSpotter website and on YouTube. We've created some templates for trailhead posters and created those for the pilot national forest, but it's a good starting point that other folks can use, or we can work with you to help create a trailhead poster of, hey, look for these species, and here's a QR code to download the app. I also would say, if you're putting out boot brush stations, including information about WildSpotter, it's just another way that the public that are using those boot brush stations, that are learning more about invasive species, is something they can do to help with the problem. And that's what I really like about this program is it's action oriented. It's okay, you've done your hike, but while you're on there, help protect this area by looking for these species. I mentioned already the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers partnership, where they have been promoting and encouraging users on their social media. If you're very deep in the invasive species world, there's been a lot of discussion recently about a national EDR framework. And I just wanted it to be very clear that is something that UGA and Forest Service is actively working with USGS on this. And that framework is not a new reporting app. It's not a new database. It's just helping to coordinate activities. And so WildSpotter will be one of those data collection tools that will be part of this national EDR framework. iNaturalist, another tool, another useful tool, but remember, iNaturalist was developed to document biodiversity, not to document invasive species. And so there are issues with the fields available in iNaturalist. There's an issue with privacy and obscuring the location of the species, that if you obscure the location of a infestation of a weed species, a plant species, then how is the Public Land Management Agency going to be able to go find that and do something about it? And if you're familiar with EDDMapS, where we are pulling the iNaturalist data for invasive species into EDDMapS, so that information is not lost, but we really see WildSpotter is a different kind of tool than what iNaturalist is. And I wanted to thank, we've got a lot of partners who have been involved with this a lot since the beginning, and just helping to build and expand and promote WildSpotter. And then, as I mentioned, we've incorporated a lot of the preventions partners from the beginning, as well as a new partner with an effort that has kind of come out of the Innovation on Invasive Species conference that Steve Manning and Invasive Plant Control has hosted for the last 4 or 5 years. So they've started this campaign around Invasives Free USA, and they're working on it in Nashville at a park system there to try to get their parks, their city parks in this area, clean of invasive species by 2030. There's a certain date that it is. And so we're trying to take that and partnering that with WildSpotter, because it's still about the concept of taking the piece of land that you care about and working to make it free of invasive species, document where invasive species are in it, so you can make it free of those. So instead of doing the innovations conference this year, we are partnering with Invasive Plant Control, and where they have normally done the conference in early December in either Idaho or Nashville. This year, instead of doing the conference, we're doing a WildSpotter invasive species ambassador training course. And so what we're doing with this is over 3 days, really training the users, bringing in experts in different areas outside the realm of invasive species in a lot of cases, to help us figure out how we can better engage volunteers, engage stakeholders and partnerships, how we can better market what we're doing, and how we can, get to those ultimate management goals. And so if you're interested in this, the website is invasivesfree.org. And there's a form on there I'll show you in a second that you can fill out and make us aware that you want to attend. We're going to choose the right group of people, looking at a diversity of where they're from, and then folks that are really doing on the ground work will be given priority for this. And so if you're interested, please go to the website, fill out that form. Here's just a little cleaner version of some of the different topics that we're going to be talking about at this meeting. And then we've got a great lineup of speakers, some from the invasive species world and some from out, that I'm really looking forward to getting their perspective. And then we're going to break up into teams at that meeting and do like a little scenario tabletop exercise that then is going to be presented to the group, and then get feedback from the group on solving a problem, handling a new species infestation in a local area. And so building those teams, building those connections to other folks that are doing similar work in different parts of the country, I think is going to be a great opportunity. So the early deadline to apply for this training is July 1st. So there's still a couple of weeks available where you can go on and apply, and then we're going to look at how many applicants we have and maybe extend that. But we're going to limit the number of participants to probably speakers and attendees less than 150 people. So I think it's going to be a great opportunity, with the plan to do it in other parts of the country later on. So that's Wild Spotter. I've gone about 20 minutes of our time, so we will be glad to talk about any questions you have around Wild Spotter, how it relates to EDDMapS, how it works with EDDMapS, any of that, I'll be glad to clarify. Or if there's other questions related to EDDMapS, that's why we're here, and we will be glad to talk about those topics and other things that you have. So I see a couple of questions in the chat that I can address, and then we can, we've got a small group, so any other questions you may have, we'll be glad to discuss. So the first question I see is, how large does a place have to be useful as a new wild place? And it's always useful because we're collecting data and we're trying to protect that place. So I wouldn't look at it as a size thing. I would look at it as something that, if it's worth, my question would be if it's big enough for that other people are going to collect data, or if it just should be, a personal wild place because you're going to collect data in that area. And so, it really, and if you're going to tell other people that, hey, they should go use Wild Spotter and choose this as the wild place, then we can easily, have that conversation with you, get the wild place added. And so it really just depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. So next question. Yeah, so the next question is trying to not involved in the back end, because each unit needs a point of contact, but also curation because each unit has a different target list. Has there been consideration to add a user type that can edit and modify the list for each unit? So yes, that is something that Dan, we have talked about. We can set up a user or somebody at a regional level like you as the administrator of a wild place. And then as an administrator of a wild place, you can go on to the website and edit the list of species for that wild place. And so it can be done. There's a couple of different ways that we can do that, but those tools have been built where a user can be assigned the owner, or the user can be assigned to the wild place and then have access to update the information and all around that. So it's really figuring out for the different situation how that makes sense. So Jason, the question is there a opportunity to contact the initial observer? So if you are the verifier, then you're going to have access to the people. If you're a verifier for an area, then you'll have access to the contact information for, or be able to contact the users that submit the data for the area that you are a verifier for. So that there is that opportunity. I did have the question recently about being able to contact users within a wild place. And that's something that we're going to have to talk about and figure out the best solution to handle that, because there's a difference there. And users who have downloaded the app and chosen that wild place that they want to be a part of versus somebody who's actually submitted data in a wild place. So it's a different way and a different and making sure that we don't violate their what they're expecting by them getting emails from a coordinator of a wild place. So there's still some thinking we've got to do on that piece of it, because it's a little bit different than how projects are handled within EDDMapS with the way wild places are handled. So will the app be for use in local open space sites programs? We ran a Weed Warrior program for a couple of years, but it discontinued this year. And so, yes, that would be, I think, similar to the previous question or an earlier question where, it depends on how you're doing this, and having city park type areas as part of Wild Spotter is something we can definitely do and work with you to set that up and be able to make sure that all the information is the way you need it. And some of that you'd be able to set up yourself, and we would just be the ones that turn it on and make the wild place public. So that's more of the direction we're going. So you would have a way to manage those programs. Something else we've had some good conversations about that I would like to do before next spring is add a way for programs like Weed Warrior programs to report through Wild Spotter like work days that they do. So you'd be able to go in to Wild Spotter, choose the wild place and say, hey, instead of reporting an observation, I want to report that we did a weed wrangle, we did a work day, and some key metrics for success, like how many people, how many hours, those kind of things that would be a way you could document that efforts, and then that could be rolled up into a larger thing depending on how you would need it. And so we haven't fleshed all that out, but if that's something that I would be very open to feedback on that, because I see that as a good opportunity to not only document where species are, but document volunteer work and give users, again, another way, more value added. And here's a way through Wild Spotter that we can help you keep up with what volunteer work was done and how many hours, and compare that to other places. And so that's something that I really would like to explore more, and we would need feedback from folks like you, Karen, on how that should look. Another question in the chat, but I'll be glad to also, like I think Joe mentioned, put the questions in Q&A. It's a little bit cleaner. But is there geofencing on record? So if a user starts to use WildSpotter outside the public properties, can we still access the records? So yes, Jason, to answer that, it does. I can go in, choose my wild place as Alabama National Forest, and I can start reporting in Georgia. And so there's no geofencing around that. The wild place gets you started in the area and gives you the species that they're interested in reporting in that area, but it does not limit you to being able to report. So, as long as you were a reporter for a verifier for the area where the record came in, then you would be able to see that record regardless of whether it was on public lands, private lands, roadsides, however that would work. Other questions?
We've got enough time. You can even go a bit off topic if you've been like, I've always wondered how EDDMapS does this.
Yeah, we will be glad to talk about things other than WildSpotter. I just wanted to really kind of have a time where we talked about it a little bit separate. If you want to increase the awareness of WildSpotters or outreach materials we can use for state social media posts, is there a social media development kit? There is not currently a social media development kit, but we have a lot of social media resources that we've created for different things that you could easily use. And that's something that when we get the position that Rachel was previously in backfilled, that's going to producing some of those materials is in templates where you can just drop your logo in and use it is some of the things we're going to do. We've got some materials with posters and banners and those kind of things on the website that are free to be downloaded, but it's it's figuring out exactly what you need. And there's been the Facebook page for WildSpotter. There is a fair amount of content on that as well that either we have done or Wildlife Forever has done. So there's probably some stuff that you could use from there, Jason. But it's so much of that. The way I look at it is it's targeted to you need to target it to the problems, and you need to target it to the area you're working in. So, hey, now's a good time to go look for this species because it's blooming, or now's a good time to go do this. And here's WildSpotter as a way you can do it. Yeah, and one Dan's question was, over time, reports via WildSpotter and reports via EDDMapS. Yeah, I mean, we're tracking all of that. And so, we know when a record comes in, whether the record is from EDDMapS on iPhone, EDDMapS on web, EDDMapS on Android, and the same thing for WildSpotter. It's finding that different audience. It's what we're trying to do with WildSpotter is reach an audience that we're not reaching with EDDMapS. And so the hope is that the people we're getting, people that are submitting data through WildSpotter may not even know that EDDMapS exists, and that's okay because we're just trying to reach them through a different mechanism.
And you can actually see some of that data already, that on EDDMapS, there is an EDDMapS dashboard. It's going off of whatever location you picked as your space, but you can look at the entire US. And one of the sections in there is, well, what project did this data come into? And WildSpotter is a project.
Right.
So it's kind of fun to go up there and see what's been coming in, and we are getting more visibility for folks of the data coming in. Part of it's just so that we have better awareness to be like, well, look, I'm getting a whole bunch of records of Scotch thistle coming in, I really want to then promote, hey, this is going on in this area. People should be aware this is going on and other efforts can work together. I've actually dropped the link into the chat for everybody for, if you go there and go to the side and pick up the EDDMapS dashboard, you can see what's going on in the system. I will say it's only the publicly reviewed data that we're showing there. We are not disclosing all the private stuff that can't be released.
But I think, Dan, I mean, the way I look at it is that it's not, I want to know where that data is coming from, and I want to know where it's working, and I want to know what we did right in this national forest or this BLM land or, you know, this state park that made us get more data in. And so, you know, the goal of this is that people can find the app and not have gone through some kind of training and will find it and use it. But it's that awareness time. And that's why we know that this project is not something that is, it's a long-term thing, because you can't get people, and this is the point that I keep coming back to, is people have to care about invasive species in order to want to do something to help with the problem. And so we've got to do a better job, we as an invasive species community, of getting our message out there, getting our message in our public lands about the problem. And then here's what you can do to help. And that's where Play Clean Go comes in. That's where Wild Spotter comes in. That's where Don't Move Firewood comes in. That's where these different campaigns come in. And so, you know, we've got to get this issue of invasive species in the forefront of these areas, because if you're on a national park and you see wild pigs, well, there needs to be something when you got that national park that has wild pigs in it that probably says, hey, those wild pigs are not supposed to be here. And here's more information about them, and here's what you can do about them. And so that's, I think, what we've got to do as a community better in order for people to go, oh, I didn't realize those pigs weren't supposed to be here. I thought they were just, you know, wildlife I was getting to see when I was visiting the park. And so, you know, those are the kind of things that we've got to do in order for the public to care and thus want to do something like Wild Spotter. Any other questions? Yeah, so can Wild Spotter be used for aquatic environment? Yes. So, you know, I talked a lot about plants because terrestrial plants are the easiest things to report because they're not moving, obviously. And so, but yes, there's no reason why, you know, it's all based on what species are put on the list. And so if those are aquatic species, then yes, Wild Spotter will work just as well for aquatic species as it will for terrestrial species. And it's where, if you know, if you're installing you know, boat cleaning stations or different information about it, then it's, you know, this is the opportunity. Hey, if you see one of these species, here's what you can do about it. And you can download this app and very quickly be able to report. So we have public lakes, but they're not public land. Yeah, so I was public lakes. That would be another way that could be created as a wild place, just like a park or a forest would. Question was, can public lakes? I guess I didn't read the question, but yes, we could definitely do a similar thing where, you know, the question becomes, and we've dealt with this recently in Minnesota, where there is a lot of water bodies, and so, you know, you want to be careful not to drown the user. When the user opens up the app, it takes their current location and it gives them back a list of the nearby wild places. And so I think it pulls the top 100 or something that are nearby for them. And so, you know, it doesn't matter how many lakes, but maybe, you know, you probably would be more successful if you started with a handful of ones, did promotion at those lakes, messaging at those lakes, and then have those loaded in the wild spotter where you could get people to report. And you know, you don't want all the species to be just species that they're probably not going to find, because then they never are going to report anything. And so you're not going to know if your outreach has been successful. You're not going to know if they're downloading the app, because these species maybe are not found there. And so I always encourage people, when they're putting together species list, to think about species that they're going to see and that are easy to identify, because that gets them using the process. And once they're using the process, then when they see that unusual thing that they've never seen before, they're going to be more likely to report it. And so just, I think that's very important when you're thinking about how to decide what species are on the list. And that would be especially the case in an aquatic environment where, you know, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, depending on if it's an underwater or above water plant, or if it's an animal, fish, or whatever, that it's going to be a little bit of a different atmosphere on the water if you're looking at boating, versus if you're fishing on the sides. What species you're going to find are going to be different. And so thinking about that as you're putting together the species list, I think, is very important. Anything else? We don't have to keep y'all for the full time, but I can ramble on about this for as long as I need to.
Well, and I'll go and ask next time on July 21st, we're talking about EDDMapS for small groups. So what's going to be there that's different from what you're talking about with WildSpotter, which kind of is in some of the private land, or some of the lands you might look at in WildSpotter? It's still a small group. So what's going to be talked about there?
Well, and Rebecca can chime in on this as well, but my gut reaction to that is, you're talking about a project where you have a defined list of people that are going to be part of that, versus where you're targeting people that you don't know their names when you are setting things up. But Rebecca.
Yeah, I've got a list.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So we're going to talk, and we've talked before in some of these other office hours, but about the project system and the dashboard system. You know, we have dashboards just as dashboards for yourself, your area and whatnot, but also the projects have dashboards, which I don't think at this point WildSpotter has dashboards. Is that correct?
No.
Yeah. So, and we'll also cover the communications that happens in the projects. That there's some differences there. And then we'll also go over some of the things that are more through EDDMapS than through WildSpotter, like the alert system, the advanced query tools, the geographic location maps that we have. And then we'll also go over, and we try to go over this frequently because we might be hitting different people each time we give these, but the different apps that we recommend and who the audience is for those apps. So if your volunteer group is, you know, essentially professionals who are just volunteering on their own time, maybe they want to use the EDDMapS Pro app. But if you have a rotating volunteer group that is really just the average person, kind of like, hey, I just kind of want to help out this weekend, then we might talk about, you know, using the EDDMapS app, things like that. So we'll go over, you know, the differences in the apps for that. So those are kind of the general topics we're going to talk about next month, and how it kind of differs from, you know, just the WildSpotter concept. You can incorporate volunteer activities and reporting using WildSpotter, and that way, if you have you just want them to use one app and just use one app only, because that way they're not switching between different things. You know, that's another place WildSpotter can come in. So those, you know, there's a kind of a slightly different audience for some of these different apps. And so like Chuck was saying, WildSpotter is very much geared towards, you know, the recreationalist, potentially going from wild place to wild place, like Chuck does, you know, visiting all the national parks.
One of the benefits of EDDMapS is you can actually mix and match between your audiences and what you're trying to do. So there may be cases where you do have a project and it's still interacting with that data coming in from WildSpotter. So it's one platform for all your different needs and audiences that come into it.
And I think you can think of, you know, what we talk a lot about, and even, you know, the questions and the audience members today, what we need to make this successful is not what the Forest Service is doing on the national forest, or what, you know, a DNR is doing. There's that piece of it, because they're the ones that control what signs are up at the entry level places and everything else, and where those are placed and all that, all the part of that we have to do at the agency level. But, you know, the work that gets done on the ground a lot of times are friends groups, or, you know, the people visiting, or the weed warrior groups that decide they want to clean this area up. That's where a lot of this is getting done. And that's what, you know, every speaker that we've asked to come in December, it's about how we do a better job of that local activity. And so I see and that WildSpotter is a tool for that, and something that we can use and have a consistent message, because that recreator may not just recreate in one state, they may recreate in multiple states. They probably do, and they probably visit more than just national forests. They probably visit national parks and BLM lands and Fish and Wildlife Service lands as well. So, you know, if we're going to get a solution to this problem, we've got to all get on board with stuff like WildSpotter and like Play Clean Go and like Clean Drain Dry, because we need the messaging for the users to be as consistent. There's a reason why Leave No Trace has been successful. There's a reason why, you know, people point to Smokey the Bear, because everybody knows what that is, and the awareness around fires related to Smokey the Bear, whether, you know, I know there's controversy over that as well, but that's where we need to be, and we see WildSpotter as one of those tools that can help.
On you for that invasives free meeting that you have coming up, you have a limit on the number of people,
Right?
correct?
Yes.
So register early.
Yeah. Submit your name on the form, and you'll be added to the list, and we're going to start contacting folks about that. But it will be, you'll have to meet certain criteria of doing something locally or trying to implement something locally. But at the same time, as we get people submitting, we're going to do it on a first come first serve basis as well. So yeah, if you have any interest in coming, please go ahead and submit that through the invasives free webpage. You just put your name and a little bit about yourself, and then we'll be following up with an email in July with a registration link and more information. Yeah. No concurrent sessions. We're all going to be in the same room together, and that's why we're and then breaking up into groups to do activities and those kind of things. And so we you know, that's why we're limiting it. But if it's successful and we have more people than we're expecting, or we have more interest than we had people, then we're going to do it again in a different part of the country, just to continue to improve it and to continue to build those connections.
Well, and if you were looking for WildSpotter to be part of your program at whatever place you might be, this would be the great kickoff. You've just come out of this centralized training for how you get it done. Hearing about pitfalls from other programs, ways it's gone well in other programs. You'd be ready to get off to the races, and being that meeting's in December, it would start your 2024 off to a heck of a start. It's like you planned it that way or something, Chuck.
Something like that. All right. Don't want to hold y'all anymore.
Chuck, did
Yeah.
you mention that we have like boxes and boxes and boxes of Wild Spotter branded stuff?
Yeah, and absolutely, and you know, I don't want that stuff to be wasted in any way, and that's why we have boxes and boxes. But yes, we have multilingual brochures for these kind of things, and so, you know, if you have good places where you can use those things, then please reach out, and we'll be glad to provide you with some materials to get you started. And existing printed materials that we have, and then templates if you need to print more.
Just dropped in the link, the registration for the next webinar. So if you're like, you know, actually the EDDMapS for small groups sounded entertaining, sign up now, be the first.
And we have done a lot of work with groups that are like small, like, hey, that, you know, we're the friends of group for this park, and, you know, we're the group for this city, we're the group for this county, all the way up to, you know, state level groups. So we've done a lot of work with the groups at the different levels and addressing the different needs for their, you know, the different capacities they have. And we, in saying that, that means also we've done a lot of individual, like, I would say one-on-one, but it's usually like one on like 10 or 15 people who are on the other side of the camera from us in, you know, walking through how the different tools work individually. So what we're going to give next month is a very kind of big overview of the different tools and things that we can offer, but we can do individual sessions where we talk, you know, with your group about, okay, this is, you know, what do you need and how are the tools able to fit those needs?
That is one thing about EDDMapS. We spend an inordinate amount of time talking to folks who have used it and saying, all right, we realize we have these existing tools and this is how we think it works. How do you think it works? And how can we adapt what we already have, starting from where we're at, which is pretty good, to make it great for what you need for your programs. I'm sometimes amazed how just little tweaks for different programs reduces that friction, that barrier that's keeping people from wanting to use the tool, and it helps us keep to improve these things.
All right, and if you have any additional questions, you can always email us. And we answer emails all day, as probably most of you guys do. So just let us know if you have any additional questions.
Thank you. I'll see you next month.